I was originally planning this episode of the Rant is Go to be a comparison of the Xbox Series X and PS5 specs, but while writing that episode, I saw a lot of people comment in my replies referencing some article that made the PS5 sound staggeringly worse than the Xbox Series X. I was curious, so I went to check it out. This article is the most biased, bullshit-filled pile of words I've read in years. The console wars are alive and well, ladies and gentlemen, and this time, people are armed to the teeth with made-up spec sheets and premature cost-to-performance charts. WCCFTECH, a site that specializes in news and leaks in the tech world, wrote an article about the PS5 specs compared to the Xbox Series X. They posited that Sony is actually misleading the public in regards to the announced performance of the PS5. Their reason? Sony announced the clock speeds of the chips are variable. That reason, though somewhat reasonable, is actually addressed by Mark Cerny on stage, where he said,
"We expect the GPU to spend most of its time at or close to that frequency and performance. That doesn't mean all games will be running at 2.23 gigahertz and 3.5 gigahertz. When that worst-case game arrives, it will run at a lower clock speed, but not too much lower. To reduce power by 10%, it only takes a couple of percent reduction in frequency, so I'd expect any downclocking to be pretty minor."
Regardless of that clarification, this article takes such a notion that the clock speed isn't fixed and uses it to fuel insane charts. The most egregious thing they do is speculate that the real clock rate of the PS5 is actually equal to what the old leaks say, and that Sony is misleading us to cover up the performance gap. We have a lot of stuff to cover in this article though, so let's start at the beginning. The first thing WCCFTECH does is cover the generational gap in power in a relative manner. By framing it relatively on each side, this makes the Xbox upgrade seem much more substantial than the PlayStation 1 because the Xbox One was a much weaker console than the PS4. It was about 40% weaker, in fact. Though this isn't too pernicious in and of itself, it's the beginning of an arc this article goes on that is hilariously biased. The next thing is small potatoes, but calling the Road to PS5 video vague when they were clear about the specs inside the machine, even releasing a full, explicit spec sheet at the same time that that video launched. Well, that's ludicrous. I guess if you don't fly out influencers during a global pandemic just so they can poke at a console, then you're up to no good. As I said before, the main crux of this article is that the PS5 spec set on stage is nowhere near the common performance of the machine, and that comparing it to the Xbox Series X is disingenuous. Not only did Cerny say that thing I referenced earlier about needing a 2% reduction in clock rate to drastically reduce the power load on the console, but he mentioned that such a situation would be incredibly rare. Also, the power management of the console is 100% predictable and deterministic. Developers can use a reference tool to know exactly how their game will run on the machine. The PS5 is designed to manage a set amount of electricity and the thermal requirements thereof. It's not like a mobile chip where it clocks up to the point of overheating and then severely downclocks to manage that. The PS5 just downclocks to a very minor degree to cope with exotic use cases. But that's enough explaining it by repeating exactly what Mark Cerny said on stage. Let's move on to the real FUD. This is where shit goes completely off the rails. Because the PS5 has a variable clock rate, WCCFTECH decided that the original leaked performance of the PS5 is the true, sustainable performance of the machine based on nothing other than that's the original number that was leaked. Then they used the delta between the original leak spec and the announced on-stage PS5 specs to derive a multiplier. And then they apply that to the Xbox Series X's performance and make an insane chart of this as though any of it was based on reality. Stated as sanely as possible, there is nothing to corroborate this lower performance that WCCFTECH has stated here other than that's what the original leaks say. It is common for the specs of in-development consoles to change before release. The original leak spec for the PS4 had just 4 gigabytes of RAM, which was doubled right before the announcement. Sony probably just finished nailing the cooling and power solutions for the PS5, and thus the specs improved from the earlier leaks. This is perfectly normal in console development. So they continue with this incredibly flawed logic and wrote up a spec sheet with interesting categories. Categories such as peak and sustained performances. Once again, this is all speculation based on the leaked specs being lower than the final spec, which is a completely normal thing as consoles develop. These numbers are meaningless. And if that last chart wasn't the point where they should have been embarrassed that they let someone publish this article, then this chart is definitely it. They even entertain in this spec sheet that the PS5 may not use as cutting edge of a fab process as the Xbox Series X. Why? Because Sony didn't say that it was an enhanced 7nm process. They only said it was a 7nm process. They also entertained that the PS5 CPU doesn't have multi-threading, which is baseless speculation, but whatever. The final straw? They literally exclude the much higher compressed speed of the SSD in the PS5 from the list, so the compressed speeds of the Xbox Series X looks much closer. For those who don't know, the compressed speed of the PS5's SSD is 8 to 9 gigabytes per second, which is basically as fast as DDR3 RAM. It's quite the accomplishment, actually, but you wouldn't want to include that in your objective, unbiased comparison, right, guys? During the next part, they go into arguments for and against whether or not the PS5's chip will be on as fancy a process as the Xbox Series X. Their arguments against the PS5 being on a 7nm enhanced process are really weak, and their arguments for it being on that process are intentionally weaker. Arguments against it include, if it is, then why isn't the PS5 CPU clocked as high? So, let's get this straight. Your reasoning here is that the PS5 CPU is 100 megahertz slower, so that shows that the fab process is lower quality? That's stupid! You're stupid! Here's a reasonable explanation. If the PS5's enclosure is smaller or the targeted price is lower than the Xbox Series X, then that would be a pretty good reason why the CPU has 3% lower clock speed. After this, WCCFTECH admits multiple times that their arguments for and against the 7nm enhanced fab process are weak, but they emphasize their arguments for the PS5 having it are very weak. This whole section is bullcrap and meaningless, and I'm wasting my breath even talking about it, so we're moving on. So, after inventing a fake clock speed that they've deemed to be the true sustainable speed of the PS5, they throw out this gem of a sentence. The fact that the Xbox Series X has 44% higher CU count is something that the PS5 simply cannot overcome. Sure, if you disregard the clock speed of both platforms, then those are the only numbers that still exist. As though that wasn't enough, they start to entertain that since the Xbox Series X is so unbelievably powerful, Microsoft might have to downclock it to make way for a fine wine philosophy that we have seen in the past. This is fucking ridiculous, but let's talk about it. Now, the only system I can think of that's ever done this is the PSP. Pretty sure it's the only one ever. The PSP launched at 222 megahertz and later unclocked the full clock speed of 333 megahertz. This is the only case of a console manufacturer doing this. So saying that Microsoft, who designed the Xbox Series X to run at a locked frequency sitting at the maximum thermal limit of what the console is safely capable of, saying that they're going to later unlock the full power is absolutely moronic. The PSP mostly did it due to concerns about battery life. The Xbox is a console. It doesn't have to concern itself with battery life, and quite frankly, should do its best right out of the gate. This is idiotic, baseless speculation. Speaking of which, they're back at it again, applying the magic multiplier to the Xbox Series X performance, saying, if they were to approach a dynamic clocking philosophy as well, they could hit an astounding 14.6 teraflops, which is absolutely insane for a console. So, if the PS5 is doing that in real life, then that isn't real. But if the Xbox does it in your pretend space, that's amazing. This article fucking sucks. Then we get another chart featuring made-up numbers for the PS5. Cool. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, we've hit the most amazing chart of them all. Somehow, through some bullshit form of divination, WCCFTECH has put together a performance to cost chart, a flops to dollars chart of the consoles versus these top-of-the-line GPUs. You know, the consoles, which currently have no prices announced, versus these GPUs, which need numerous other parts to function at all. Thank you for the knee chart full of stupid bullshit, you guys. It's really cool. I know what you're saying. You're saying, Dan, why are you doing an episode of the Rant Go about such a stupid article? Well, here's why. This article has already spread misinformation about these consoles. I've seen people popping up in my notifications who think all of this is reasonable speculation because they clearly don't understand it. This isn't just contained to one article from WCCFTECH either. This other one links to the one I just covered while saying the Xbox Series X's got a higher clock custom Zen 2 CPU and most importantly, comes with 44% more compute units compared to the PS5. Take note, they thought it was necessary to bring up the 2.8% increase in the Xbox's CPU clock speed, but completely unnecessary to mention the 22% advantage the PS5's GPU's clock speed has on the Xbox. Clearly this is FUD, and it's disgusting. People are shitty and misinformed enough about these consoles without websites like WCCFTECH throwing fuel on the fire by lying and confusing people more. All they care about is clicks, not informing their viewers or improving the conversation around these next-gen consoles. Well, I'm finished with this nightmarish pile of BS. Join me next time on The Rant Go when I do an actually comprehensive comparison of these consoles and speculate within reason on the differences they'll have. I'll even bring up the Xbox's secret sauce, a thing this article would have done if it wasn't written by a profiteering jackass. This video was brought to you by the power of the legendary GigaBoots executive producers, Vincent Povert, Nicholas Cameron, E. Lee Broyles, Star Falcon, Spaceman Spiff, Danny Richardson, Dryzart, Red Blaze 27, and Texas Man joins Smash. Thank you for lending us your power, our executive producers. And also these guys. If you want to become powerful like our executive producers, then head on over to www.patreon.com/GigaBoots today.